The Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez's trail of terror and the justice that finally stopped him. The desert city of El Paso, Texas, in the early 1960s was a place of dust, railroad tracks, and long, hot afternoons. It was here, on February 29, 1960, that Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez was born, the youngest of 5 children to Julian and Mercedes Ramirez. His father, Julian, had once served as a police officer in Mexico but worked in the United States as a laborer for the Santa Fe Railroad. Home life was marked by instability and occasional violence, with accounts of Julian's quick temper and the use of strict, sometimes harsh, discipline. Young Richard, often called Richie in his family, showed signs of trouble early. He suffered from multiple head injuries in childhood, including one incident when a dresser fell on his head and another when he was knocked unconscious by a swing. Modern criminologists have observed that such trauma can sometimes be a risk factor for later behavioral disorders. By the time he entered adolescence, Richard was described as a withdrawn boy, often keeping to himself and showing an unusual fascination with dark and morbid stories. A defining influence in his teenage years was his older cousin, Miguel Mike Ramirez, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who had returned from combat with profound psychological scars. Mike told the boy lurid stories of the war, descriptions of torture and cruelty, even showing him Polaroid photographs he claimed were of women he had assaulted or killed in Vietnam. One afternoon in 1973, when Richard was around 13, he reportedly witnessed Mike shoot and kill his wife during an argument in front of him. Though Mike was later deemed mentally unfit for trial and institutionalized, that experience left an indelible mark on the boy. During his teenage years, Richard began spending more nights away from home, sometimes sleeping in a local cemetery. He experimented with marijuana and later with harder drugs. At 15, he worked at a Holiday Inn, where he was fired after he attempted to assault a guest. Legal consequences were avoided because the victim declined to press charges. These early brushes with law enforcement hinted at the dangerous path that lay ahead. By the late 1970s, Ramirez had grown into a tall, thin young man with sharp features and a quiet demeanor that belied his inner turbulence. He developed a deep interest in Satanism. Whether as a true belief system or a way to shock and intimidate others remains debated. He also turned to petty theft to support himself and his growing drug habit. In the early 1980s, Ramirez left El Paso for California, drifting between Los Angeles and San Francisco. He lived in cheap motels, sometimes sleeping in cars, funding his transient existence with burglaries. This period saw his petty crime escalate into acts of disturbing violence. The first known killing attributed to Richard Ramirez occurred on June 28, 1984, in the Los Angeles neighborhood of Glassell Park. The victim, Jenny Vincow, was a 79-year-old widow who lived alone. Her body was found by her son in her apartment. She had been sexually assaulted, stabbed repeatedly, and her throat was slashed so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. The brutality of the crime suggested a dangerous escalation from burglary to sexual murder. Decades later, in 2009, a cold case DNA analysis linked Ramirez to the April 1984 murder of 9-year-old Mei Leung in San Francisco. Mei had disappeared after leaving her home to play. Her body was later found in the basement of her apartment building. Although Ramirez was never tried for this killing, the evidence suggests it was one of his earliest acts of homicidal violence. After the Vincow murder, there was a period of relative quiet. Ramirez continued committing burglaries and assaults but drew little public attention. That changed in the spring of 1985. On the night of March 17, 1985, Ramirez targeted a condominium in Rosemead, California. He entered through the garage, where he encountered 22-year-old Maria Hernandez. He shot her in the face, but the bullet was deflected by her car keys and she survived. Inside the home, her roommate, Dale Okazaki, heard the commotion and peeked around the corner. Ramirez shot her in the head, killing her instantly. An hour later, in the nearby suburb of Monterey Park, Ramirez approached Veronica Yu, who was sitting in her car. He pulled her out of the vehicle, shot her twice, and fled. You died at the scene. The random nature of the attacks, young and middle-aged women in different neighborhoods, killed without obvious motive, terrified the public and frustrated investigators. 10 days later, on March 27, 1985, Ramirez broke into the home of Vincent and Maxine Zatsara in Whittier. He shot the 64-year-old Vincent while he slept, then attacked 44-year-old Maxine. Reports state that he sexually assaulted her and stabbed her multiple times before killing her. The level of violence escalated even further in this case. Investigators found that her body had been mutilated after death. This attack provided crucial forensic evidence: a shoe print left in the flower bed outside the home. The print was later identified as belonging to an obvious sneaker, a brand not widely distributed at the time. This distinctive mark would eventually help tie Ramirez to numerous crime scenes. Over the next several months, Los Angeles and neighboring counties were gripped by fear as Ramirez continued his nighttime assaults. His victims ranged widely in age, ethnicity, and neighborhood. Unlike many serial killers who focus on a particular type, Ramirez targeted men, women, and even children. His methods also varied, sometimes shooting, sometimes stabbing or beating victims, often with acts of sexual violence. The lack of a single pattern made it difficult for police to narrow their search. Residents responded with alarm. Hardware stores reported surges in sales of locks, guns, and window bars. Many families began sleeping with lights on or with neighbors nearby. The media dubbed the mysterious predator the Night Stalker. Ramirez sometimes left signs associated with occult symbolism, most famously a pentagram scrawled on a victim's body or on walls. Survivors recalled that he demanded they swear to Satan. Whether these acts were an expression of genuine belief or a tactic of intimidation remains uncertain, but they contributed to his fearsome reputation. By mid-1985, law enforcement from multiple jurisdictions, including Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Orange County, were sharing evidence and trying to coordinate their hunt for the killer. The obvious shoe print emerged as a key link between crime scenes. Ballistic tests also began to suggest that the same gun, a .22 caliber revolver, had been used in several shootings. Public fear reached its height after Ramirez attacked an elderly couple in their home and left behind further evidence of ritualistic symbols. Communities across Southern California were locking their doors and windows at night, and the press began publishing front-page headlines about the Night Stalker. The killer, however, remained at large. His ability to slip in and out of neighborhoods, often using stolen cars, and to select victims apparently at random, frustrated even experienced homicide detectives. As the summer of 1985 reached its peak, Ramirez's crime spree was still accelerating. The pressure on law enforcement mounted. The citizens of Los Angeles were desperate for a break. By late summer of 1985, the task forces hunting the Night Stalker were closing in, but the killer remained elusive. Ramirez had by then become bolder and more erratic, crossing county lines and even briefly leaving California. On the night of August 24, 1985, Ramirez broke into a Mission Viejo home occupied by 29-year-old Bill Carnes and his fiancée 29-year-old Inez Erickson. He shot Bill in the head at close range, seriously wounding him, and then assaulted Inez before fleeing. Miraculously, Bill Carnes survived his injury. Inez, though badly hurt and terrified, demonstrated remarkable courage. She was able to give investigators a detailed description of the intruder: his tall, lanky frame, sallow complexion, unkempt black hair, and rotting teeth. Equally crucial, witnesses in the neighborhood reported seeing a suspicious orange 1976 Toyota station wagon. That vehicle had been reported stolen. For the first time, detectives had not only a description but also a vehicle to focus on. A few days later, police recovered the abandoned Toyota near Los Angeles. Technicians dusted it for prints and lifted a clear fingerprint from the rearview mirror. The print was quickly matched to Richard Ramirez, a 25-year-old drifter with prior arrests for auto theft, drug possession, and burglary. On August 29, 1985, Los Angeles authorities held a press conference announcing that the Night Stalker had been positively identified. They released his mugshot to every newspaper, TV station, and radio broadcast in the state. The image, a gaunt young man with hollow eyes, appeared on front pages and TV screens across California. The tide of fear began to shift into resolve. Citizens were now on the lookout for the predator who had stalked them for months. Unaware that his face was now known across California, Ramirez returned from a short trip to Arizona on August 31, 1985, arriving by bus in Los Angeles. Stopping at a convenience store in East Los Angeles, he noticed several people staring at him and whispering. He saw his own face on a newspaper headline, "Night Stalker Wanted." Ramirez bolted, fleeing the store and running through the streets. He attempted to carjack a vehicle but was stopped by a group of local residents. A chase ensued through residential streets until more neighbors joined in. They subdued Ramirez, beating and holding him down until police arrived. In a dramatic reversal of months of terror, the very community he had preyed upon delivered him to the authorities. The trial of People v. Richard Ramirez began in July 1988 in the Los Angeles County Superior Court and became one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings of the decade. Ramirez's appearance and demeanor in court caused as much sensation as the evidence itself. Thin, pale, with long black hair and dark eyes, he often dressed in black and at times flashed a pentagram he had drawn on his palm. He occasionally turned to the cameras or the gallery with a chilling half-smile, once shouting, "Hail Satan!" The prosecution, led by Deputy District Attorney Phil Halpin, laid out a meticulous case. Key elements included ballistics. Bullets recovered from several murder scenes were matched to a single .22 caliber handgun used by Ramirez. Shoe print evidence. The distinctive obvious sneaker print found at multiple crime scenes matched a pair owned by Ramirez. Fingerprints. Prints lifted from stolen cars and crime scenes linked Ramirez directly to the attacks. Victim testimony. Several surviving victims, including Maria Hernandez and Inez Erickson, identified Ramirez as their attacker. The defense, led by attorneys Arturo Hernandez and Daniel Hernandez, struggled against the overwhelming forensic evidence and eyewitness testimony. They argued that Ramirez was a victim of a troubled upbringing and drug use, but the jury remained unmoved. On September 20, 1989, after more than a year of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Ramirez was convicted of 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 counts of sexual assault, 14 counts of burglary. On November 7, 1989, Judge Michael Tynan sentenced Ramirez to death in California's gas chamber. As the sentence was pronounced, Ramirez addressed the court with a chilling statement. "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland." His lack of remorse horrified the victims' families and the public. Following his conviction, Ramirez was transferred to San Quentin State Prison, where he spent more than 2 decades on death row. He never expressed genuine remorse for his crimes. Over the years, he received letters and even marriage proposals from people fascinated by his notoriety. In 1996, he married Doreen Lyoy, a freelance magazine editor who had corresponded with him for years. The marriage later became estranged. Ramirez's case remained an object of study for criminologists, who pointed to a convergence of risk factors: early trauma, repeated head injuries, and exposure to domestic violence. Negative role models, particularly his cousin Mike's stories and violent acts. Substance abuse, heavy cocaine use during his crime spree. Psychopathic traits, lack of empathy, thrill in domination and suffering. For survivors and the families of victims, however, the psychological wounds of his crimes never fully healed. Richard Ramirez died on June 7, 2013, at the age of 53, from complications of B-cell lymphoma, compounded by liver failure and chronic hepatitis C. He died still on death row, never having faced execution for his crimes. Law enforcement professionals often cite the Night Stalker investigation as a milestone in interagency cooperation and in the use of forensic science such as shoe print analysis, fingerprint databases, and later DNA testing. The case demonstrated how a killer's mobility and randomness could paralyze a city, and how a combination of science, coordinated policing, and community vigilance could finally bring him to justice. The summer of 1985 remains an especially grim memory in the history of Los Angeles and surrounding counties. Ordinary homes, once thought secure, felt like open targets. The city learned a hard lesson about vulnerability and resilience. In the words of a former LAPD detective who worked the case, he thought the night would always hide him, but the people he terrorized became his undoing. The Night Stalker's reign ended not just through forensic skill, but also through the courage of survivors, the determination of detectives, and the resolve of ordinary citizens who refused to let fear rule their lives. Evil thrives in silence and fear. But when communities unite, when victims speak, and when science and law work together, even the most elusive predator can be caught. If you found this deep dive into one of America's most terrifying serial killers informative, make sure to subscribe to our channel True Crime Spectrum for more in-depth, fact-checked true crime stories. We bring you thoroughly researched narratives that separate fact from myth, shedding light on infamous cases and the justice that followed. Don't forget to hit the like button, share this video with fellow true crime followers, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next investigation.